most women, birth is supposed to be this beautiful, empowering moment. But for 1 in 3 moms, it is traumatic. And I'm not just talking about medical complications. I'm talking about emotional, physical, and even psychological trauma that women experience when they give birth. And it can impact you long after you leave the hospital. If you ever felt like your birth experience left you shaken, anxious, sad, or even broken, you are not alone. So in this video, I want to talk about what birth trauma looks like, why it happens, and how you can start healing from it. And I will share my own experience later on in the video as well. So birth trauma is not what most people think, where it is related to an unexpected emergency that happens during the birth. It's any experience that leaves a woman feeling unheard, ignored, helpless, powerless, uninvolved. And it can be physical, it can be emotional, psychological, and it can even be infant related. So I'm going to break those down for you. The first thing is physical. This is the most obvious one. So birth trauma can come from something that happened physically to you, the birth itself. If you had a C-section, the entire operation and everything around it could cause birth trauma if it wasn't a positive experience. Excessive bleeding can cause birth trauma. As much as people might think, oh, you just lost a lot of blood, everything around that, the feeling of losing the blood, the feeling of lightheadedness, you worrying about if you're going to survive this, your partner worried about it, it can leave you with trauma. Excessive tearing, perhaps during a natural birth, and even a natural birth itself. If you had perhaps your mind set on having a natural birth with an epidural because your pain threshold is really low and things turned out differently and you ended up having an unmedicated birth, that can also leave you feeling traumatized. If there are any complications with the placenta and they need to do a manual removal where they insert the hand all the way through the vagina into the uterus, that entire experience can leave you feel traumatized. It can leave you feeling like your body was out of control, that you were out of control, and that you absolutely had no idea what was happening in that moment. Then emotional trauma can take many forms. It can be in hospital, the way that you experience the context, the clinical setting around you. Perhaps you wanted a home birth because you are deathly scared of hospitals and you ended up having to go to hospital. And then if things didn't turn out according to plan, you wanted a natural birth, you ended up with a C-section because of fetal distress, or the baby was not in a good position, or you wanted a C-section and you went into labor beforehand and you had a natural birth. Anything that didn't go according to plan, breastfeeding, how you labored, if an induction failed, if you had an assisted delivery and they had to use equipment to help get the baby out, anything that makes you feel like it didn't go according to plan can leave a mark and is still classified as birth trauma. With psychological birth trauma, that has got a lot to do with how you were treated during the birth. And the biggest thing here is the feeling of powerlessness and ignored, not being involved, and not being asked about your choices. It can be something that to someone else sounds so simple. You know what, I didn't want that they break my waters, and they did during an internal examination. And someone might tell you, well, what on earth are you on about? But for you, you felt powerless in that moment because you didn't want that. You had your reasons, you did your research, you wanted it to happen naturally. Someone did something without asking your consent, without checking with you, and that feeling of powerlessness together with anger, because you were not involved in that decision, is traumatic. And people often downplay things that happen to women during childbirth as, maybe it was just in the moment, or the favorite thing, just be grateful that your baby is alive. Someone else lost their baby. This is not the benchmark for a good birth experience. You shouldn't be told, just be grateful that your baby is alive. Birth trauma comes in many forms, and 1 in 3 women, that is a lot of women experiencing birth trauma. We need to move away from thinking it is just if something really bad has happened. like a baby that died or a mother that hemorrhaged almost to the point where she nearly died. Yes, those are traumatic birth experiences, but you are in the most vulnerable position of your life than you will ever be when you give birth. And anybody that in that moment takes advantage of your vulnerability by not asking you for your opinion or for your consent, doing an internal examination without asking, mistreating your baby, ignoring your partner, making you feel not empowered but powerless, that leads to birth trauma. And it is real. And we need to talk about it more, because if this is not dealt with, this is a big factor that leads to postpartum depression in many women. And then you also get the NICU, an infant-related trauma. So NICU is a neonatal ICU. If your baby had complications or they're born prem and they might go to the NICU, that can also be traumatic for many women, because you had this expectation to go home with a baby and you go home empty-handed. But the way your baby is treated after birth and for the duration of your stay in hospital has a big impact on you as well, not just on them. So how does birth trauma affect women? Well, it can leave them with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and anxiety, where they keep reliving the birth, and that they will tell you, I keep reliving it in my mind, but I don't actually want to talk about it because then I relive it more, and every time I go through it, I am traumatized again and again and again. And then when I mentioned before, postpartum depression, and a traumatic birth is one of the biggest risk factors for women to develop postpartum depression, because you are dealing with a traumatic experience, but you are not necessarily dealing with it effectively, or maybe you're in denial, but now you are thrown into the depths of a newborn coming home, 24/7 demand on you, and sometimes you just don't have the time to deal with it. And all of those emotions and thoughts, they build up, and the more they bottled up, the more they put you at risk of developing postpartum depression. Then fear of future births. Maybe you wanted 4 children, you had one traumatic birth experience, and there were women who told me in the past that they will not consider future pregnancies because of this one traumatic birth experience that they had. It is a big reality. And before we go into how to deal with it, I'll share a personal experience from my side. It was my babies were prem, they were admitted in the NICU, and coming home empty-handed was really tough for me. I struggled to feel connected to them. I was trying to pump, get enough milk to them, but I felt really lost and not knowing where I'm supposed to be, because I'm leaving these brand new babies with people I don't know. I see them, but I don't feel like we know each other. I was there the entire day for 12 hours during the day, and every night coming home with empty hands was not the greatest experience. But I am grateful that that was the extent of my birth experience. From a professional point of view, I know how bad it can be, so I'm really grateful for what I did get, and that it was still a positive experience. But there are so many moms out there who are silenced because people don't recognize or validate the fact that they had traumatic birth experiences. And I hope this video gives you that opportunity to understand that what you've gone through might have caused the feelings that you might be feeling currently. If you felt like you were out of control, or you had no power, or you didn't feel empowered at all, that you might have experienced birth trauma. And dealing with that is, for starters, acknowledging the fact what happened to you. It really does help to talk to people. If you can talk to a professional, I would always recommend doing that. If it's not within your time, financial means, or location, talk to a friend. Find a mom group and someone who's willing to also share their story. There's immense power in talking about how you are feeling and hearing someone else share their stories and just getting it out of your system, just opening up those bottled up feelings. But acknowledging how you're feeling, that is absolutely where you need to start. It is so individual to every woman. But what I want to say is, if you think that you are 1 out of 3, then getting the correct support is absolutely crucial if you would like to have kids in future. Because as much as your next birth can bring healing after the first traumatic birth, it can continue the cycle as well if you still haven't dealt with the issues that you had in the first birth, and now you're having a second one. So please, whatever it is that you need to do to start processing what happened, share it with your partner. They might also be traumatized by it, but maybe not saying something because they feel that they don't want to burden you. Share that experience together. Share it with another mom. Share it with your medical team. If they were part of the perpetrators, then find a professional outside to go and talk to. But it is so crucial to deal with that trauma. And it's not only so that you can just feel better, but it's also for the sake of your baby, because they deserve 100% of you. You've worked so hard to bring them into this world. They don't deserve only 30% of you, because 70% of you is dealing with trauma. They deserve 100%. Even if you just do it for them, for the sake of your marriage that is inevitably going to be impacted if you have a traumatic birth, then do it for them. Reach out. But you cannot be alone in this. The healing starts when we open up about it, talk about it, acknowledge what happened, and do our research to make sure for future births that is not going to happen again. You are going to be empowered with your next birth. You owe it to yourself to heal.